To say the least, the Los Angeles Lakers had a far from perfect season, and they were yet another example of the consequences of a short off-season. With the injuries of LeBron and Anthony Davis, it was clear that this team had no chance against other rosters like the Suns, full of young depth and star power as well. But even though these injuries that happened were unfortunate, it did reveal the Lakers' weaknesses at the highest level, which will allow them to make some moves this offseason to fix them and complete their championship caliber roster. And yes, if this team wants to make sure they get a deep playoff run next year, they will have to make some major additions and even get rid of some players, because it was clear that many of the guys on this promising LA squad just couldn't step up when it mattered most. Today, we have to talk about the LA Lakers, and in particular, what signings and trades this team could make to increase their chances of a chip exponentially. And let me just say that you'll want to listen to all these moves, because there are some smaller ones that could surprisingly make the Lakers a lot better as a whole. But before we get into that, if you've been enjoying the content, it would be absolutely clutch if you subscribe if you're new and join the Wiz crew. Fun fact, over 95% of you guys who have been watching the videos consistently aren't even subscribed, so if you just hit that sub button below, I could go full time and make videos like this every single day. Before we discuss what moves this team has to make, we just have to talk about the issues on the roster, because whatever the problem is will influence what moves this team ends up making. It's no secret that Anthony Davis is one of the best in the league at his position, but when he got injured, his true value was really shown, because the Lakers just weren't the same without him. Now I know, it might seem obvious that without AD, the Lakers team would be worse. I mean, that's the case for every star, right? Well, for AD, it was different, and if you watched all the games after he went out, you can attest to this. Despite still having LeBron, this Lakers team just didn't have the pieces they needed to win without Anthony Davis. Not to mention that their offense and defense fell off hard. With this injury, the Lakers' biggest flaws were revealed, especially in the playoffs against the Suns, and if they want to have a bounce back season next year, they will have to fix all of them, or else LA fans might just be disappointed once again. After the Lakers won their first chip, it seemed like they had a great offseason revolving around getting big men like guys like Montrezl Harrell, Marc Gasol, and during the season, Andre Drummond. But despite all these players being great in their own ways, they just weren't what this team needed, which was one of their biggest problems all the way down the stretch. What the Lakers need is a big man to run the center that is mobile, has the ability to switch, be a rim protector, and not rely on the pick and roll heavily to get buckets on offense. It was clear that all the centers of LA just couldn't do these things, which was a big reason for their struggle. For Marc Gasol, it was very clear that Father Time was finally catching up to him because he had terrible mobility and versatility on the defensive end of the ball. And even though he shot the three ball well, it was at very low volume, which basically makes it irrelevant. On the other hand, Drummond was somewhat of the opposite. He couldn't shoot the ball to save his life, and needed the pick and roll that the Lakers hate running to get buckets. And he couldn't even protect the rim despite his massive size, which made him an overall liability on both sides of the ball, which is why he got benched. The only somewhat decent big man for the Lakers was Montrezl Harrell, but he couldn't match up against the starting centers either because he just didn't have the size. And even though he didn't rely on the pick and roll as much as Drummond, it was a big part of his game, which made the Lakers offense a lot worse. It is clear that LA needs a big man, and they will more than likely be moving on from all the guys I mentioned and looking to get someone new. But aside from the big man issues, this team also lacked a couple of things, one of which was a guard who could be the secondary playmaker for this team. When Anthony Davis was healthy, this issue was somewhat covered up, because AD and LeBron could just take turns getting tough buckets. But when he went out, all the scoring pressure was on Bron, and it was clear that this team desperately needed another playmaker. Now, the Lakers had someone who could do this in their championship run with Rajon Rondo, but after losing him, they thought that Dennis Schroeder would be a solid replacement, which was far from the case. Schroeder might just be the most disappointing part of the Lakers' late season disaster solely because of the fact that he couldn't be a consistent option for this team when they needed it most. With Schroeder more than likely packing his bags and leaving, it will be crucial for the Lakers to get a guard that can be the primary or secondary playmaker for this team, so they have someone else that they can rely on in case of injury. Although playmaking was a big thing missing from this team, perhaps the biggest issue was something that helped them the most in their championship run. That thing being perimeter shooting, and it's safe to say that they will need a lot of it this year. I'm not gonna lie, in their championship run, the Lakers got very lucky because literally all of their role players stepped up and shot the three ball at an elite rate. Guys like Morris, Rondo, KCP, and more were elite down the stretch and honestly were one of the keys to the Lakers getting the chip. But this year was, well, a whole different story. We already knew that the Lakers had a lot of streaky shooters, but it was exposed in the series against the Suns where this team struggled immensely shooting beyond the arc, which is why they need to get some more consistent shooters to be outlets for LeBron and AD. When LeBron is the best three-point shooter for your team, that's not a good place to be in, and in my eyes, this will be a top priority for the Lakers front office this offseason. To sum it up, this team needs to get a consistent big man who can be a defensive monster and solid on the other end as well, a playmaker who can take the load off of LeBron's shoulders, and shooters who can be consistent outlets for the stars of LA. So with that being said, let's just get right into the top trades and signings that the Lakers need to make this offseason, and let's just start with the biggest problem at the moment, which is shooting. Now I know what a lot of you guys are thinking, the Lakers should make a move for a disgruntled star Damian Lillard, but honestly, I just can't see it happening. And if they wanted to make this trade at this point, they would literally have to trade away Anthony Davis to get anywhere near the returns other teams would be offering. So instead of making a move for star power, this team will need to make some sneaky trades to get depth, and in my eyes, there is no better player to target than Joe Harris. Despite his recent poor playoff performance, Harris is about as consistent as it gets from the 3, being that he shot the second highest percentage of the league on high volume. Harris would be a versatile guy who could ignite the Lakers offense and be the outlet for Brown and AD. This deal would be simple: Kyle Kuzma and draft capital if needed for Joe Harris. With his value lower than normal because of his playoff performance, Harris would be a great player to trade for right now. And there are rumblings of the Nets making some major changes with the role players. On Brooklyn's side of things, they don't need more offense with their big 3. What they need is defense, and Kuzma has actually developed into an underrated young defender in the league, which is why the Nets make this move in my eyes. This one is a low risk, high reward situation for both sides, and in my eyes will be a win-win trade for both teams. Now, although Joe Harris is a bucket and could play a solid role for this team, what if they could trade for a big man that fits all their needs and shoots over 30% from 3 as well? Well, to say the least, the Lakers are in luck, because there's a big man that is a versatile defender, rim protector, and solid offensive player that might get traded this summer. That center being MYLES Turner of the Pacers. And to say the least, he would be one of the best moves that this Lakers team could make, period. MYLES Turner is going to be one of the most sought after centers in the league this offseason because he truly has everything that a team needs to have a great offense and defense. Turner is one of the best athletic two-way centers in the league. He's shown that over the past 2 years, he's a switchable floor spacer and rim protector with a 3-ball, and the stats don't lie. In the 2019-2020 season, Turner shot 4 threes a game at 34.4%, and last year he shot 4.4 a game on pretty much the same efficiency. This is a match made in heaven for the Lakers, so let's just get right into the deal that could get it done. In this trade, the Lakers would send off KCP and Montrezl Harrell in a sign-and trade along with picks if needed in exchange for Turner and TJ McConnell. We already know the impact that Turner would have for the Lakers because it would solve their center problem that I mentioned earlier. For the Pacers though, they'll be looking to mix it up, and 2 young guys like KCP and Trez would be very enticing for them. Montrezl Harrell could allow his team to run small ball and switch it up, which could lead to them winning in my eyes. Now this could only happen if Montrezl wants to go to Indiana. Otherwise, he'd have to use Kuzma instead and not make the Joe Harris trade. And Turner will be in high demand for teams, but if the Lakers throw in a pick as well, there is no doubt in my mind that they could get the deal done. My list of other big men that the Lakers should target if this doesn't work out consists of Serge Ibaka, Jared Allen, and Yusuf Nurkic, but Turner is the undeniable best fit for this team. Now that the big men and shooting issues are out of the way, we have to talk about the playmaking guard for this team, because to say the least, it will be very tricky to get who they need. Now I know that in an ideal world, the Lakers could sign someone like Chris Paul or Kyle Lowry, and their problems are solved, but as of right now at least, it would be nearly impossible to get the deal done for those guys because they will be offered big contracts elsewhere. But despite not being able to get guys like I just mentioned, there are still plenty of other guards that could fill the role that LA needs. Guys like Spencer Dinwiddie, Reggie Jackson, or my personal favorite, Derrick Rose. Rose has shown that he can be one of the more versatile and balanced players in the league, and he's looking to get a ring, so there's no better team to join than the Lakers. For LA, Rose could start or come off the bench if they want to give Talen Horton-Tucker a bigger role in the regular season. Not to mention that Rose can do it all. Score, play make, whatever you need, he's got it in his bag. This would help the Lakers a ton having someone as consistent as Rose, and he's shown that he can step up in the playoffs when it matters most, which is definitely a plus for this team. To make this move happen, the Knicks and Lakers would sign and trade swapping Dennis Schroeder and Derrick Rose. Schroeder would be another solid guard that the Knicks could develop or flip for more assets, and Rose is the savvy veteran guard that LA needs. I could see both sides agreeing to this deal because Schroeder wants to leave, and Rose, well, he wants to win, so there's no better trade for both of these teams than this one. The last move this Lakers team should make is a lot less exciting than the previous ones, but in my eyes, just as important. The 3 trades and signings I mentioned already would solve a majority of the Lakers' problem, and if they do go down, all they would have to do after that is get some cheap role players that could have a big impact. Guys like Jeff Green, Nicholas Batum, or JJ Redick would all be great role players to add to a somewhat cheap deals to complete their roster. It has been very clear, especially this year, that relying on star power can backfire big time, being that all the teams left in the playoffs are some of the deepest in the league with role players constantly stepping up. So if the Lakers can get guys like that, well, to say the least, the league should be in trouble next year. Whether or not the Lakers make these moves is up for debate, but it's no secret that the issues with the roster mentioned in this video need to be fixed, and it will be very interesting what moves this Lakers squad tries to make to bounce back next season. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I'll catch you on the next one. Woods out.